This goal automatically alerts me, the language teacher, for one of my most important tasks here. It's just that with realistic fiction, it is so much easier to create language development opportunities for our very, very new language learners. I decided to skip the word smeared and instead use the expression made a mess, because this is a more handy expression for our students. Hello, dear ELL teaching colleagues. In my latest video, I talked about two general approaches to teaching a language. One of them involves following a clear scope and sequence to teach specific skills in a specific order, following a curriculum, and the other approach involves creating learning opportunities for our language learners while using more authentic, more natural material, such as authentic texts, videos, memes, pictures, picture books, and so on. But today, I wanted to be more specific about one of my favorite ways of creating language development opportunities for my older newcomers and SLIFE students through using picture books. Important disclaimer, I will be specifically talking about authentic, realistic fiction picture books that are originally meant for younger learners. Today, I would like to present a little algorithm or an outline of steps that I always seem to follow whenever I pick up a picture book for language development experiences for my newcomers and SLIFE students. Let's start by picking an appropriate book. Today, I want to share with you a couple of principles that I follow when choosing a book for my older newcomers and SLIFE students. Number one, I think these books should involve real people, perhaps not animals, not monsters, and other creatures. And they also should have realistic illustrations. We don't want to insult our older learners by exposing them to babyish content and rudimentary pictures of fuzzy little things running around. We want to make sure that our students can relate to these books. Number two, the plot also ideally should be based on realistic events that our students can make connections with. Of course, there is nothing wrong with out of this world twist of events, as long as we can make that accessible to our students and as long as we don't have to explain every little thing. I have nothing against other genre of picture books that are originally created for younger native-speaking students. It's just that with realistic fiction, it is so much easier to create language development opportunities for our very, very new language learners, because you can hit a lot of survival English in them, and you can also lean on their knowledge of the basic survival English vocabulary while explaining new ideas, characters, and events in these more realistic books. Number three, amount of text. Ideally is 1/3 of a page, but you will see that with a lot of these books, you will have half a page, and I will talk about what we do about that. The quality of the text. Make sure that the text in these books does not have a lot of figurative language and play on words. Otherwise, we will be explaining every other sentence, and then it becomes redundant. Students lose interest and are not learning the whole a lot. Last but not least, ideally, these books should have some humor in them, because that lightens up the mood, sets a good stage for absorbing the language and the content, and lowers the affective filter, and ultimately helps our students gain much more from this reading experience. And now let's talk about the process of using picture books with older newcomers in our ELD classrooms. Whenever I pick up an activity that is something more than a regular language development lesson, like a lesson, for example, that targets specific grammar rules or reading rules or vocabulary, I like to set up very clear objectives. And in this case, I ask myself, what is the original or authentic goal for reading a picture book? What would be the purpose for our native speakers? speakers. We can all agree that usually people read them for entertainment. They enjoy the story, the big idea, and details. This goal automatically alerts me, the language teacher, for one of my most important tasks here, which would be to make the content and language of the book accessible. This is where we talk about comprehensible input, because without understanding what is being taught to us or what we're being presented with, we are not going to learn much, and we're definitely not going to enjoy a book. Let's go back to more of our goals. So besides the original authentic purpose of reading a picture book, we language teachers can have our own goals, which here would be to turn the book into a language teaching tool. I like to break this goal into 3 parts, showing how familiar language is used in new context. By this I mean the grammar and reading rules and vocabulary that we have already covered with our language learners. We're going to show them how they are used in the context of a specific book. Then we will also help them learn new language, and perhaps we will use the book to teach our students some language art standards, like story elements, literary devices, mood, writing structures, and many more. Now, our task here would be to create opportunities to help our EL students learn new language and content. Let's look at specific steps to help us achieve these goals. To help our students enjoy the plot and details, we will need to make the book comprehensible. We do this by building background and clarifying vocabulary in the pre-reading work. In a minute, I'm going to give you specific examples of how I do that. We will also use gestures and facial expressions. We will be paraphrasing difficult language, and we will be omitting parts. Again, I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. Let's look at the additional purpose of reading a picture book with older newcomers, which would be to use the book as a language teaching tool. So like I said, an ELD teacher's task here would be to create opportunities to help ELs learn new language and content by allowing interaction with the text while reading, offering exercises that target specific language and content in the post-reading work, letting ELs apply new language in creative writing tasks, also in the post-reading work, and also having ELs work with the text from a language arts point of view. And now I'm ready to share with you my example that hopefully is going to help you pull all of that theory together. My example today is called Daisy's Crazy Thanksgiving. Now, if you're watching this in 2022, I'm a little bit behind on the holiday seasons here, but the materials I'm going to share with you for free today, both around this specific book and with all those steps, are applicable with whatever books you are going to pick up. After I read the book, I immediately started thinking of what would be the big message I want my students to understand and what are some of the little details. So together those things would help my students enjoy listening to or reading this book. And in a nutshell, Daisy, a little girl who lived with her parents in the apartments above their family restaurant, really loved being with her mom and dad and working in the restaurant, but around holiday times she was feeling really miserable, and so she asked her parents to let her see her grandparents. Her mom immediately told her, you don't really want to go there because Thanksgiving at grandparents' house is a zoo. And then the book goes to describe what it is, and yes, Daisy still ends up convincing her mom to let her go, and Daisy witnesses all the crazy things that are happening at grandparents' house. Daisy ended up asking her mom to come and pick her up, and when she got home, she said that that was a little bit too crazy, and she was really happy to be doing dishes after a really busy Thanksgiving dinner at the restaurant. And she said that this is crazy but nice. And then next year, while she was really looking forward to leaving grandparents' house and all those crazy relatives, she is thinking that next year she does want to invite them, and she thinks it will be crazy but fun. I promise I'm about to show you what kind of activities I created to go with this book, but I first want to show you this note that I actually wrote for myself after I had tried about 4 to 5 books and realized that these points were super important before creating activities. So here it is. Number one, be very clear about which details of the storyline are important to understand and to enjoy the idea and humor. And skip the parts that overload our students with extra vocabulary and are not key to understanding. And my second suggestion is to have a clear idea about which words you want for your students to be able to understand, which is receptive language, and which words and which structures you are planning for them to use, which is the productive language, after reading. These two pieces of information will help guide your pre-reading work and the vocabulary and grammar focus during and after reading. It will also help you identify which parts can be skipped and or paraphrased. Now, there are lots of notes that I jotted down as far as the Daisy's Crazy Thanksgiving, and I'm not going to read all of them to you. You will have access to all of this. I just wanted to say that I was clear about the big message, which for me was that family or close friends could be too much sometimes for us or too crazy, and we should be able to just choose to be with our closest ones or by ourselves. And I also wanted for my students to enjoy all of the funny details about relatives and things that happen at the dinner. Now, this should help you explain why I did what I did. So in the pre-reading, these are the words I chose to work with, and you will see that I am trying to involve my students as much as possible into clarifying these terms or reviewing them or using them in sentences. Yes, the word zoo was super important. We talked about quiet and noisy because one of my language objectives is for my students to be able to describe a crazy event. Now, this was really funny because my students decided to act like these animals and to make their noises, and we ended up turning into a really noisy or loud classroom. Just worked beautifully for us. Pets and unusual pets. Now, this is our while reading activity. Because it was important for me to explain to my students how Daisy was feeling in the beginning of the book and then at the end of the book, I wanted to clarify all the jobs that she was doing in her restaurant and her feelings during the Thanksgiving dinner because there was too many dishes. And now, talking about using a different word or rephrasing things, in the book it says that there were twice as many dishes to clean, twice as many salads to make, and so on. I decided to skip that expression twice as many and just to use too much work because there are already so many other words and expressions that were important to understanding the story. So these are the things that helped us explain what was going on. Again, here, baby Philomena, she actually picked up her cereal and smeared it onto Daisy's dress. I decided to skip the word smeared and instead use the expression made a mess because this is a more handy expression for our students. This can be used in so many more situations. And again, it got the job done. It explained what Philomena did. These things were important. The word raw, I couldn't go around it. I really thought this was important to explain, although it's not a super frequently used word for our students and not so necessary at this stage of language acquisition, but because I made other, I think, smarter decisions about other words, I thought I could explain what it was because it was super important in the events of the story. She got anchovies on her pizza, so I did want to show them and see their reaction, and that's probably how Daisy felt. It was important to talk about what dogs were doing because they were big culprits in the craziness during the Thanksgiving dinner. And again, here is a word making the mess. I could use it again in the same book. And here it is the notion really crazy or too crazy versus crazy but nice. Next year, she wants to invite relatives, so we did work with the word next, and the easiest way for me was to refer them back to our calendar work, which we do pretty much every day. And here is the new expression crazy but fun. And then in the post-reading work, I'm going to take you to my packet here. Nothing super fancy, but the first page allowed us to review the events and vocabulary in some closed activities or multiple choice. We also talked about what each of the relatives did because it wasn't my language objectives. I wanted them to describe what each relative did based on the illustrations in the book. Then I offered them this little creative writing phone. I asked them to think of another family member that could be at that Thanksgiving dinner, and my students came up with Uncle Cesar. This is what they wrote. Uncle Cesar played a lot of video games and raged when he lost. He was very loud. Of course, it was one of my higher proficiency students who came up with raged, and I had to explain it to my newcomers. And then one more assignment. I wanted them to apply the new vocabulary and ideas to tell a personal story. So I asked them to sketch a crazy event that happened to them, and then gave them a sentence starter. One day we had a, for example, many of them chose Christmas or a quinceanera or a family dinner. And here I asked them to choose. It was too crazy or crazy but fun. And all of them chose crazy but fun and just wrote a couple of sentences. I did try my very personal best not to make this too long, but I realized it's not so easy to come up with a brief explanation of how to work with picture books that are meant for younger learners and utilize them in a effective way with older language learners. Like I said, you will have a link below to this packet that I showed you today. And also, if you have any books that you would like to try with your language learners and are not sure how to approach them, send me the titles. I will be more than happy to create activities around them based on how I see them and what I think will work. Happy whatever season this might be that you're watching this video in, and happy teaching!